Hey, welcome back to the channel. So today we are outside of the garage, as you can see, because Delilah is now officially too tall to fit. And that's because we got a new rooftop tent. But as you can see, I've also had to get new roof racks. Originally I had the roof basket on here with 2 racks, but with the weight of the tent, we've had to go up to 4. And with just the 2 Yakima racks on there, we also did quite a bit of damage to the gutters on the van. So this side of the van, you can really see the damage. Right here on the gutter, and this is actually a fairly common thing. You can see the gutter's been pushed down in the front and is pulled up a little bit in the back. It's happened the same back here as well, where you can see the gutter is a little bit twisted. Second issue with the Yakima gutter mount rack. It's a little less obvious, but still a very big problem. So the Yakima gutter mount feet use a sliding bracket in the back here to actually clamp onto your gutter. As you tighten it down, this bracket moves up and inboard, so it clamps both this way and this way on your gutter. Now, the design is simple, it's effective, but the problem with the high roof is there's not a lot of clearance between your glass, the metal, and that bar. So as you crank it in, this moves back and ends up resting right on the metal and right on your crystal light. That's why right now I've got this thing braced up, get them to properly clear the glass without making contact. And we've also had to modify these brackets a little bit. Okay, so now that we've got this off, I can show you a little bit closer the actual foot assembly. Now, you can pick up these Yakima racks for dirt cheap on Marketplace, Craigslist, even the Wrecker, you'll find them quite often, because they were all over the place when cars had gutters. Now that they don't, people are basically giving these things away because they're just taking up space in their basement or the closet. But what you will find is most of them are going to be far too low to fit onto your hybrid, and that's because obviously they came off of a car. Now, the racks themselves are a multi-piece setup. You've got your foot, then there's a saddle, and a clamp that sits on top. Obviously, those are still sitting on my van, but hopefully you get the idea. Because they're a multi-piece setup, that means that you can space them out. Now, Yakima does actually offer a spacer kit, which lifts the load bars up about 3.5 inches from their factory setting. I have 2 aluminum ones on the vehicle already, but the next rack that I bought didn't have the spacers. So I just hopped on my 3D printer and made some new ones. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. A 3D printed part holding all that weight, there's no way it's gonna work. Well, 3D printing does work for a lot of things. You just have to be very mindful of where the forces are. Because this is being sandwiched between the foot and the saddle, these parts are all under compression. The rest of the load is all being put into the bolt here. So all this needs to do is be able to support weight straight down. Now, you might be wondering what the second part is on here, and that's this thing here that slides over top. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But this little part is how we're going to prevent this whole foot from rocking back and forth and causing the damage that you saw to the gutters. In the meantime, I'll show you how to modify the metal bracket. So when you get your used rack, chances are it's come off of a car, so it's not gonna have a bolt this size in it. Now, obviously, I've had this one apart in the past to put the bolt in. We're gonna take it back apart anyway so I can show you how, and we can take the time to modify the bracket this time. Now, if you are wondering about the bolt size, it's just a regular 3/8 SAE bolt, and I believe this one is 4.5 inches long. Now, first thing that we need to do is get this foot out, because obviously that bolt won't pass through. In order to get the foot out, we need to remove this pin right here. From factory, this pin is riveted, so it's been mushroomed over on the one side. The easiest way to remove this pin is to take it over to your belt sander or to use a file and just file off the side that's been mushroomed over. Once you get far enough, you'll see a small ring form. Once the ring falls off, just push the pin through and this will slide out. Now, because I've already done that before, I've mushroomed this over a little bit with a hammer. I'm just gonna try and squeeze it back into position with a pair of pliers, because if I sand it off again, there won't be enough material left to use this pin the second time. So now that we have this out, you can see the shape, and you can see how much this actually comes down and this section goes in. Now, for most cars, that's not a problem because this ends up above the roof, but with the Delica, obviously, it's not gonna work. So what we need to do is try and flatten this out. So all I'm gonna do, take a rag, wrap it around there, and I'm gonna clamp it in a vise. Now, we're not trying to go crazy. If you go too far, this actually won't slide down far enough to go over the gutter when you try and install it, and it can be a little bit difficult. So here's our original bracket unmodified. We're at about 2 centimeters to the top here, and at the corner, about the same. Now our modified bracket, you can see the corner we've taken out quite a bit actually. We're down to 10 mil here, and about 15 mil on the end. So all that's left is to reassemble. And if you're modifying these to fit the blocks, remember, you are gonna have to change that bolt. then we can go ahead and reinstall our freshly modified bracket. Make sure that we have the retainer threaded all the way out. Slide the bracket in place, and if you were able to grind the end off without doing too much damage, we can now reuse this. If for whatever reason these pins are no longer reusable, you'll have to remove it and replace it with a nut and bolt. But I think we should be good with these ones. Push it back through, and then I'm just going to place it down on my vise and hit the top of the hammer to try and mushroom it over again. Alright, and that's it. We're done in that section. So now, let's take a closer look at those riser blocks. Now, these are the riser blocks that I made. Yakima does have riser blocks. They don't come up all that often, and they're pretty expensive to buy new. Hence, I opted to make my own. Now, the block simply slides over, and if we were doing this the way that Yakima has this set up, you would now simply take your saddle, put it on top, and then take the bar retainer and clamp it all together. But the problem with that is, again, the round bar. Now let me show you what I mean. Unfortunately, I don't have a foot that's assembled to show you, but I'll try my best to explain it anyways. I've done this up in CAD to try to give you a little bit better visual representation of what I'm trying to explain. So we have our gutter at the bottom, our roof rack foot, our load bar, our attachment clamp, and our attachment. And basically, what this all boils down to is Newton's laws of motion. If we look at the law of inertia, an object at rest wants to remain at rest, and an object in motion wants to remain in motion. So how does this come into play? Well, if we're driving along at, say, 50 kilometers an hour, and we hit the brakes, car, meaning the gutter down here, wants to stop. But our rooftop tent, it wants to keep on moving forward. Now, with the square bar, this isn't really a big problem. If you slam on the brakes and your tent wants to keep on moving forward, it can, but because of the square bar in the square hole, we don't have any rotation, the entire foot just wants to slide forward on the gutter. Now, obviously this isn't ideal, it's going to scratch up your gutter, but it's probably not going to do anything more. However, with our round bars like our Yakima, this force acts a little bit differently. So now, in the same scenario, if we're driving along at 50 kilometers an hour, and we have to slam on the brake, that tent wants to keep moving forward. But because we have a round bar here instead of square, it acts like an axle, and, well, you can see the motion that we end up with. The tents move forward, our load bar has twisted inside the foot, and our foot, in turn, has now twisted on the gutter. Now you can imagine what this kind of angle would do if this was actually attached to the gutter. We would have bent the gutter up in the back, pushed it down in the front, and ended up with a real big mess. The more that this happens, each time you accelerate, it goes back. The more you brake, it goes forward, and we end up with this walking motion, and eventually the gutters just get completely destroyed. So I had to come up with some kind of solution to combat that rotation. Now I could have just put on square bars, and that was one option, but at the same time, if you're going to use square bars, then why not just get a rack that uses square bars? And the solution came in the form of this little bracket here. So it doesn't really change the way that the bars assemble. You still drop your spacer right over top of the bolt. The only difference is instead of putting the saddle on and then the load bar clamp, we're going to slide this little bracket on first. Now this bracket does fit onto the OEM spacers or onto the spacers that I made and sits right in place like so. So slides right on over. Then we're just going to take a piece of aluminum angle, and that is going to drop into the channel on the bracket. So once assembled, you end up with something that looks pretty much like this. So how does this work? Well, the problem is that we were having a rotation on the foot. With this bar on here, if we rotate the foot forward, you can see the bar tries to lift. Because it's a roof rack, we obviously need a crossbar in the front and in the back. Once we put our crossbar in the rear, we have a full assembly like so. Now when we try and rotate, we're trying to lift up against this back bar as well, and in turn, this back bar, which is trying to rotate forward, is trying to push down on the front bar. So, by locking them both together, we've now eliminated the possibility of either of the feet being able to rotate forward and cause damage to the gutter itself. The only thing we need to do now is determine the spacing between our load bars, and then we drill a small hole right here in the aluminum to both allow our bolt to pass through, but also to lock the bar in place to prevent it from being able to slide. And then with the whole system assembled, this is how it should look. So as you can see, we've got lots of clearance now between the rack, the glass, and the rack, and the paint. Because now even if I throw all my body weight into it, the movement is only a fraction of what would have been there before. So I didn't show you guys how to actually install the rack onto the van, but this video wasn't really about installation. It was about how to modify the rack so that you can safely use it on a Delica without doing damage. Just remember that because the Yakima racks are multi-piece, when you put it up there, it can be a trapezoid. So make sure that everything is square before you bolt the rooftop tent on, unlike what we did, and then had to try and square it up after the fact. But either way, that's done. So now all I gotta do is pack the van and I'm out of here. If you enjoyed today's video, like and subscribe. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.